Okay, so please welcome narrative designers Molly Maloney and writer Eric Stirpe.
Hello. It's so great to see all of you. Oh my gosh. My name is Molly Maloney. I am a narrative designer. I was at Telltale Games for over 5 years. I'm now the lead narrative designer at Bad Robot Games. And my specialty is nonlinear narrative and branching dialogue.
And I'm her husband, Eric. I'm a writer. I was also at Telltale Games for about 5 years or so. And these days, I'm freelancing and working for folks like Epic, Jam City, and a bunch of others, which has been really exciting.
So I just wanted to start off by saying thank you so much to Konsoll for having us back. We're really excited to be here. Thank you to all of you for apparently liking to listen to us talk. So really excited. We normally talk a lot about conditional or branching narrative, but this year we wanted to make it a little different. And so this talk is called More Than Quest Givers, Why Good Characters Matter. And it's focused on storytelling with an emphasis on creating good characters and how lore can function in your video game. So let's get started.
And so when we were discussing what to do for this talk, obviously we gravitated to a lot of topics about story and narrative because that's what we do. It's our day jobs, and it's what we get really excited about. But we also wanted to find a topic that will be relevant to as many developers as possible, even the ones who aren't making quote-unquote story games.
Which, by the way, I hear that term a lot now, which is like story games, which I actually kind of find it a little odd. I mean, I get it. Like, there are lots of games that emphasize narrative and story, but to me, it kind of implies that you've got story games and then story games versus any other type of games. And to me, that's strange because I think that there are lots of different games that can benefit from story.
Yeah. So if you're out there thinking, this isn't relevant to my interests, my game doesn't need a story.
You are right. Your game does not, I probably shouldn't even say, this is a great soundbite for this talk, right? Your game doesn't need story, but it's true, you don't. I mean, look at Tetris. A great game doesn't need story. But in my opinion, having a story and having a great game, these are not mutually exclusive concepts. So, and honestly, there are very few games that I believe wouldn't benefit from having a cool story attached to it in some ways. So why don't we just dive in? And I kind of want to start by painting a picture, which is, this is something that's happened to me. I think it's kind of relatable. But it's like release day for a game that you've been looking forward to. You've probably pre-ordered it. You sit down to play it, and this game, it's got everything. It's got an expansive world. It's got deep, thick lore. Thick with 2 C's, yes. It's got books and codexes for days. Like, it's got everything, and yet you just can't get into it. Like, you can't really say what it is. It's just like not grabbing you. And this is a challenge that we as devs face a lot. We put all of this work into creating something that is special, but it can, for whatever reason, kind of fall flat. Not only do I empathize with this feeling as a gamer, I fear this feeling very much as a dev. Like, you put so much work in. And it's like, I'm throwing everything I've got at you, players. Like, you want quests? You want skill trees? You want, like, I don't know, base building? What do you want? But what do I want, Eric?
Well, I mean, we already told the name of the talk, so, spoilers. The issue in a lot of these instances tends to be with the characters. And, like, to use an example, like, if someone were to ask you, like, what's Star Wars? You probably wouldn't answer with like this, because like
actually sometimes you will. It's like, well, let me get started.
And a lot of this comes down to the fact that like Star Wars is so much more than just the timeline and the facts of what happened and the plot. Yeah, because a good story, it's the plot and it's also the characters that the plot is happening to. Like, that's the stuff that makes us really connect with stories. It's through the characters. And because it's like if we see ourselves in Luke, suddenly all that stuff on the left about X-Wings and Starfighters and, Tashi Station, all that stuff actually starts to mean something. And it means something because, like, I'm rooting for him. And, I'm happy when he's happy and I'm mad when he's mad. And me following how he feels and changes and grows, like, that's the story.
That is the story.
And so really the way you can think about it is if your game has characters, it probably has a story already.
And also, just to return to that earlier point where it's like, does your game need a story? there are a lot of games out there with stories that didn't probably need them. Like the story of Angry Birds is pigs stole eggs and the birds are angry about it. Like, it's literally the title. Like, the birds are angry. Did I need a story to enjoy Angry Birds? I absolutely did not. Did I like that it had one? Sure. Like, it informed the art and stuff. It was kind of fun.
Yeah. And like another great example is like Portal, where it's like, this is about an evil robot trying to kill me as I solve puzzles. And it's like, it's really hard to imagine Portal without that story, without GLaDOS. But it's like, when you really think about it, like, those puzzles are incredible by themselves. Like,
yeah,
those
puzzles are great.
Story.
They totally didn't need story on them. Even Pac-Man probably had a story, like, I don't know, a hungry person running from ghosts. I'm not sure, but spoilers.
Or there's some darker interpretations.
Yeah, if I'm honest, I have no idea what the story of Pac-Man is, but it has these super iconic characters. So people have spent years like trying to figure out what was going on there. The point I think I'm trying to make is that characters are the building blocks of great stories. Characters allow for great stories to happen. And like any other feature in your game, characters need to be well designed. Which leads me to how I view characters as a designer. At the end of the day, characters, frankly, to me are just design tools. And in my experience, players get more attached to characters than any other story elements that I throw out. So having a great character actually helps keep players playing. And my job as a designer is to keep you from putting the controller down, so this is only good for me. Characters provide a lot of other good stuff too. They provide opportunities for players to feel a sense of progression, investment, and also context for the game and its world. So from the design perspective, there's tons of benefits to having good players other than just the writer wants me to have them.
Although the writer does also, tend to want characters, for all those touchy-feely writer reasons. But I want to talk a little bit about like what makes a strong character in a video game.
Like, so you want characters? What makes a good character?
And this is the kind of stuff that I spend a lot of too much time thinking and talking about. And for me, like a lot of it boils down to these two things of appeal and stakes. And of these two qualities, appeal is probably the hardest one to quantify. And so like when we were talking about this and like how are we going to do this. There was this quote I thought of from Walt Disney, where Walt Disney said, appeal in a character corresponds to what could be called charisma in an actor. A character who is appealing is not necessarily sympathetic. Villains or monsters can also be appealing. The important thing is that the viewer finds the character real and interesting. And appeal is that magical blend of like appearance, personality, and relatability. It's why everyone from like Link to the companion cube works as a character. It's frankly just kind of what makes us fall in love with them. Again, it's like it can be hard to break down how it works specifically, but I'm going to try here. So, what is appeal? First off, it's clear personality. It's how a character reacts and expresses themselves. Whether they're a comedic relief character, whether they're a bad guy, they need to be able to express their personality in a clear and memorable way.
Even if it's just having a heart painted on a cube.
Yeah, exactly. We just know, like the companion cube.
It loves us.
A character needs wants or needs. You got to know what motivates them, how they can be manipulated. Like maybe they're greedy, maybe they love animals more than anything. This is just knowing like what drives them in the story. Next up is relatability, which means that it reminds you of something in your own life, and hopefully it's something universal. Maybe it could be yourself, maybe it could be a friend or family member, it could be a pet. This is the thing that helps players connect to those characters. And then finally, has a face. This one isn't a strict requirement. Obviously, we've already mentioned the companion cube. We've mentioned characters that don't have faces. But like people do tend to like things with faces.
Sometimes if it's not working, just put a face on it. Like potted plant, whatever. Meanwhile, on the stakes side, so what about stakes, right? I like to say stakes, aka why do I care? Stakes are just why do I care? Stakes really are really important from a design side because this is about player motivation. And as far as I can tell, frankly, there are a few categories for stakes, and it's okay to take from multiple categories. In fact, more is, in this case, more. The first one is gameplay value. Is the character useful to me in a gameplay sense? My example for this is when you're playing Skyrim and you've got like Uthgerd with you. I want to keep Uthgerd alive. She's carrying probably 60 pounds of books. If she dies, I have to take those books with me, which means I'm dropping 20 items or I'm coming back to this dungeon for 60 pounds
She's
of
like
books.
your book bag.
Yeah, she's my literal book bag. So in this case, I have stakes to keep Uthgerd alive. This is inconvenient. The next one is personal value. And this is more wishy-washy, but frankly, Uthgerd can almost fit in this one too, which is, do I personally care about this character? Am I invested in them from an emotional standpoint? This is a better example of this would probably be a BioWare party member, where it's like, oh, I want you to like me. Like, those are the stakes. I will feel bad. I will reload if I make you mad at me.
You want Caden to be alive so you can keep flirting with him.
That's right. Thank you for exposing my love interest in Mass Effect.
No problem.
Caden's the best. I will fight you. The final one that was not rehearsed. The final one was plot value. So plot value is more generic, but this is a character who's significant to the story, but in more of a high-level context. And frankly, this is just a bad guy. In most stories, where it's like, this is the villain. They're gonna kill everybody if we don't do something. They're gonna take over the world. And these characters are not often directly. They aren't providing stakes in the moment to moment. Like, I might not interact with them constantly, but they're providing contextual stakes for the experience. This is Ganon in Zelda,
These are characters who, if they were gone, the story would have a hard time moving forward.
Right, the story doesn't exist. And then I also just kind of wanted to tell a story because I think it's funny, but it's about my own experience with stakes that I wasn't expecting in a game. And this was quite a while ago, but I was playing The Witcher 1 for the first time. And I don't remember the game super well, so please don't. You can YouTube it and see if I'm wrong, but this is how I remember it, which is early in that game, there weren't merchants. Like, it was like an hour into the game that you got your first merchant, but you did all this stuff in Kaer Morhen, and I accumulate items. I pick up anything on the ground that I can find. And so I
need a book bag in Skyrim.
Right. And so I had a ton of stuff on me, and I really wanted to sell. And so I finally got to my first town, and there were a merchant. There was like a dwarf merchant. And being the Witcher, when I clicked to go sell stuff, it immediately put me into like this massive conversation. I was like, I just want to sell my stuff. And I happened to pick a choice where it pissed him off. And he said something very hurtful to me and then walked away from his stall and would not sell me anything or let me sell. And I was so frustrated. Plus, like, I hadn't saved in like an hour. It was a merchant conversation. I did not think it was a high stakes situation.
You didn't know how much gameplay value you
And I had
had.
to go and find another merchant. It was like ages away. So this is a great example of, like, any moment can have stakes attached to it. And actually, it was kind of a great example for, like, it was kind of brilliant on The Witcher's part, where it was like, no, conversations in this game matter. And they told me right up front, my first merchant, that like it was important. So anyway, stakes are cool. Unless you're trying to sell something in The Witcher 1.
Right.
So now that we've talked a lot about characters and kind of what makes a good character, I want to talk about the other important piece of the story puzzle, which is lore. Really quick as a caveat, even though this is a story talk, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on plot. And this is because A, I think plot is really overrated. And B, plot is frankly what happens when good characters and good lore mix. So if you have questions about plot, I'm happy to answer them later. But this is the good stuff, in my opinion. So what is lore? I've been told in the past that I actually have a pretty broad definition of lore, but I find that really lore is just a fancy word for stuff you want the player to know. That's it. It's just stuff you need the player to know. And whether it's background about the world, context for your objectives, or just fancy made-up words, lore is stuff. It can be easy to forget this, but lore has a very important function. Lore is context. It is the context that allows our players to ground themselves in our universe. Without lore, I don't feel like I'm a part of this world. I don't know what's going on. All games need it, not just fantasy ones or ones in made-up universes. I could set a game in contemporary New York City right now, and I'm still going to have lore because there are players all around the world who don't live in New York. So I have to explain how the subway system might work or different things. Anyway, Lore is the stuff that I need to immerse myself and my players in an experience.
And so, obviously we're talking about lore. It's really important. It's really great. But it's also important to remember that there can be a dark side to developing lore, and it's something that even the greatest developers occasionally fall victim to. And for this talk, we're giving it the overly dramatic name of the lore trap.
Dun, dun, dun.
But the lore trap is when the desire to define and explain the rules of your world gets in the way of a player's ability to actually experience it. And this is something that tends to happen when we get overexcited about lore in pre-production. It's where we generate way too much of it, and we create these boxes that we can trap ourselves in. And it can also lead us to overexpose the player to that lore because we're so excited to share it with them. Like, they boot up the game and we're throwing our terms and our and our history at them.
I've spent 3 years making this lore. Please enjoy it.
And it's really funny because the thing that serves us really well as game makers can often bite us in the ass as storytellers. It's like we love making those rules and those systems, and creating a lore can be a lot of fun, but it can really also be a slippery slope. And I've got an example here that to kind of demonstrate that idea. So we're going to start here with the premise for a story. A noble warrior saves the life of a child.
I dig it.
Yeah,
It's nice. It's clean.
It's clear and it's concise, and we could totally work with this and run forward with it. But what often happens is, as time goes on, you say to yourself, well, is this tropey? Is this cliched?
Is this unique enough? I've seen 3 movies that have this plot.
Yeah, is this really that unique? And we might say, okay. Let's maybe try and punch it up a little bit. So we'll say, all right, it's not just a noble warrior. We want to show people that in our universe, our warriors have magical powers.
Oh, a mystical
It's a
warrior.
mystical warrior. And also that child's got amazing powers too.
Oh, it's a special kid.
Yeah, so the kid's also cool, special.
Nice.
And so this is starting to feel more interesting, right? We're starting to say, okay, this is now starting to feel like a story that's a little bit more unique. But it's still not quite capturing our specific universe.
Well, mystical can mean a lot of things.
Right, is it a fantasy term? What does it mean exactly? And so I think what we really need here is some specificity. What's really missing is some made-up words.
A fancy word for our mystical warrior.
Right. So now to summarize the story, we're going to say it's a Jedi Knight saves the life of a child with amazing powers.
Cool.
But, also, I'm thinking now, the other thing we could probably do is we could use, some more specificity. It's a Jedi Knight on a mission of diplomacy saves the life of a child with amazing powers.
So he's, going about his own business. Or she.
Right, and yeah, actually,
and then happens to save this kid.
And actually, I like what you're saying here about, the happenstance of it. This makes it sound like that's his mission. So actually, so I'm going to scrap that. We're going to say the Jedi Knight stumbles upon the child.
Oh, it's a surprise.
Right, it's a surprise, and amazing, I'm bored of that word. We're changing it to incredible now.
Oh, but that means the same thing.
But, this sounds better. We're going to rescue him.
Okay.
And also, I want to get in there that the kid was a slave.
And no, that's so bad.
Right, he's living in a desert. It's real bad that he's a slave.
Good thing you were there.
Right, so we're saving him. So now, okay, here we go. Jedi Knight on a mission of diplomacy stumbles upon a child with incredible powers and rescues him from a life of slavery in the desert.
Weirdly, I'm still on board.
Right,
I'm okay.
Here where it's a nice balance of lore and story and character.
Tight.
But here's where we hit a tipping point with the lore trap. Because, maybe now we say, well, okay, mission of diplomacy, that's pretty dry. And we just made up this really cool villain. So actually, that Jedi Knight is negotiating a blockade with the Trade Federation.
Wait, what's the Trade Federation?
Well, and he doesn't just stumble upon it. He winds up on the desert planet of Tatooine.
Tatooine? Is that a word?
Yeah, we need to get in that, that it's a sci-fi thing. It's a planet.
Okay.
What?
Do you though? Do you? Keep going.
Listen. No. I'm going to tell you about this. It's a young child. He has a super high midichlorian count. He's great at pod racing. Hey, listen. Well, I mean, rude.
Okay. The point is, there's a lot here to unpack. And when you're a new viewer to something like this, it can be a lot. There's a lot of information that's being thrown at you. And so trying to onboard into a concept, it can easily become one of those things where the lore is really interesting, but when it's all there all at once, it can be a lot to process.
Yeah. Because lore, like rude people in a crowd, sorry. What I meant to say was, lore is like spices. Some makes food taste delicious, but too much is overpowering. And over-articulating your lore, it doesn't leave room for the imagination, for you or your players.
So I'm the kind of person who likes to break things down and evaluate what's helping my game and what's hurting it. And I actually had a Vela designer once who always used to say, is the juice worth the squeeze? And I actually think that this is a great way to put it when it comes to lore. I like to think of lore in 3 categories, and these categories help me determine what is productive. And I call them what, why, and how. So what is lore that matters for what I am currently doing? Like, is this important to me right now in what I'm trying to accomplish in this game? Why is lore that tells me why things are the way they are. It explains what's going on. It's contextual. And then how is lore that explains how things work. And they're all important. I want to be clear. Like, I think all of these are very important. But I don't think that they're equally important. So, for example, I only care about why something is because the what is good. If, moving forward, there we go. If, you know, what is going on right now is interesting, then I care about the why. I will stick around to find out why. And for like the Angry Birds example, right? Like, I don't care why the birds are angry if I'm not having fun playing the game. Furthermore, if I need to know how something works to know why I should care, that can start to make a lot of demands on my ability to retain information as a player. Examples of this are when you need to explain political systems or how a ship's hyperdrive functions to convey stakes to the player. Like, I need to drop all this exposition for you to understand why this is a high-pressure moment. And I'm not saying do not do this because, frankly, like, I've done this a million times. I'm more saying that as you're doing it, just be aware of when you're doing it and how often it's happening. So I just want to show kind of a practical example of what I mean here. So I'm literally just going to make up some lore about a hypothetical game. So in this hypothetical game, our what is the lore that maybe in this world only priests can carry swords. I'm just making it up. And how is this useful for what I'm doing right now? Like, what's the reason for this? Well, if I have a sword equipped and I go into a town, maybe I'm going to get attacked. This immediately matters for the core gameplay loop. When I'm playing this game, it's going to be frustrating if I don't know this. If people start attacking me in the town, that's going to suck. So knowing that right up front, this is very important for how the game functions on a core level. This lore represents a design concept, and the player will be punished for not knowing. Our why lore could be, well, why is this? It's because swords in this universe might be considered holy. Which is interesting. It's like, oh, it's like a divine thing. That's kind of neat. And the reason this is a why is because I don't need to know that swords are holy to enjoy the game. But knowing this information could provide helpful context as to the what. Why are, you know, people are attacking me in towns for having one. So I, you know, maybe, and so my thought was like, you know, also what's nice about a why is as you move forward in the game, it can actually provide additional interest. So like maybe I end up with a quest later where it's like I have to pose as a priest to get a sword. Like that could be neat too. So whys can have future importance. Finally, the how. And the how for this example, actually the how for a lot of examples is usually there's a legend. 2,500 years ago, this man named, I don't know, like Methuselah Bogerton or something went to the top of a mountain and got a sword from the divine. And like, why do I need to know this? I actually don't, but it's just interesting, right? Like, this is how lore. It's just like, oh, because I'm so interested in the what and the why, how becomes more interesting. Like, I want to stick around in this universe and discover everything that has to offer. So each of these are awesome. But the reason that we don't always know how, I've completely lost my notes, so I'm just going to wing it. But basically, the reason that it can be complicated from time to time is players don't know what information is always significant. So when you receive something, like you're trying to decide, like, does this matter, does this matter, does this matter? So the way in which we as designers kind of drop that lore on players can matter. You know, dropping too many hows too early may be confusing. Do I need to know this, or is this just flavor? So that's kind of one of the things I think it's important to keep in mind when you're working with lore.
And just to play devil's advocate for a second, you know, we want to look at like how does this explain why fans get so hooked on the lore of like their favorite movies and games and TV shows and stuff. Like we've talked about some examples of like of things where people really love that lore. But the thing is that they get hooked on the characters first, because characters provide that context for the lore. You know, because characters have beliefs and opinions, and they're the lens through which that information becomes personal. You know, I'm self-conscious now by using a Star Wars example, but Tatooine by itself is just a planet. But when we first see it, it's Luke's home, and that's what makes it important to us. And you know, honestly, the secret is that characters are just kind of lore buckets. And before we get into some more practical tips and tricks for making great characters, I just wanted to give a shout out to a game that I think has an awesome cast of characters and is a really amazing case study for the power of characters in a surprising way. And that's Thomas Was Alone, where like by themselves, those are just some rectangles up on screen. Like they don't even have faces.
But a narrator tells us their names and that they have feelings and that they care about things.
And that's all it takes, because like at the end of the day, like human beings love characters, and like they want to kind of map personalities and characters onto anything, even if they're just boxes. And so then let's dive into talking about some tips and tricks now. And so first of all, I wanted to talk about making multidimensional characters, and by this I mean the kind of characters that that will hopefully people will fall in love with, and and will think about even after the game is turned off. And there are a lot of little tips and tricks that I like to use personally when making characters, and most of them come down to the idea of giving hints about their life before the story and what they hope to do in the future. And this is the kind of stuff that will make them feel like living, breathing entities and not just like little wind-up toys that sprang into existence when you booted up the game. And so like some of my favorite things to include are hobbies, like do they knit or whittle, or maybe they love to collect old radios. Like people, those are the little details that are really fun to discover. Relationships with other characters can be super helpful as well. Like, knowing how your character interacts with others and what others think of them can shape a player's opinion too. Like, if I meet character A, and I like character A, and then we meet character B, who's their brother, I'm like, oh, I'm inclined to probably like you a little bit, because, like, you're connected, you're friend of my friend situation. Another great thing to give a character is opinions that aren't related to the plot. And this is kind of like hobbies, but it's more like little personality quirks. This is things like a fear of spiders, or they love the smell of soap. Like, kind of like in real life when you meet a person, you find out that there's something that they like or is
there's
important to them.
There's weird stuff we like people like things.
Yeah.
And but it's worth mentioning, because a lot of the time, in a game, you'll know exactly like the plot reason why a character is here and what they're here to do, but there's so much more you can add to them that makes them feel less of a character and more like a person you want to spend time with.
And finally is secrets, which are things that a character doesn't want to tell you at first, but then you find out. And like giving a character secrets is a great way to it makes them seem mysterious when you want to find out those things about them. But then also like when they reveal something to you, like it gives them this feeling of being really layered. And overlapping these things is great. Like for example, like someone could have a secret hobby, or like or like you could meet someone's brother and they tell you like, oh, did you know my brother like is really scared of spiders? Like that's the kind of stuff that that just really gets the player feeling like they've got stuff to dig into. And next I want to talk a little bit about how we can use these characters to help onboard the player to our lore, to kind of tie it all in. Where'd it go? Yeah.
I'm going to take this slide, but from a functional design perspective, characters are, as we've mentioned, they are basically one of our best tools for telling you about the world and things in it. They're the mouthpiece for a lot of information in our games. But that doesn't mean that they should just spew facts about the world. And yet, there are a lot of games where this is exactly what happens. You walk up to somebody and they're like, let me tell you about smelting. And I'm like, well, cool story, bro. So I just want to kind of show different tiers for, ways to relay information to a player that, with the goal of having players actually absorb that information. Because when I click that guy and he starts to tell me about smelting, I like tune out a little bit. And so the key to delivering lore through a character, at least in my experience, is, frankly, adding extra steps, having the lore occur over multiple periods of time, making the player work to earn that lore. Earning things is the best way to retain information. And then trying not to give exposition away for free.
Yeah. So if we were to kind of examine these as tiers, if you want to run through these.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like, oh, and I'm gonna use the backstory, but frankly, this could be any lore-related thing. It could be like a, you know, like this is how we make ships in this universe, or this is how we smoke fish. I don't know. It could be anything. The bronze tier for me is I click on a character and they say, "Let me tell you my tragic backstory. Let me tell you my tale." That's fine, you know, it gets the information across and it's useful, but I think we can do better. Silver, bring me 6 foxtails and I will tell you my tragic backstory. This is better to me because I'm earning it, at least. When players earn information, they tend to retain it a little better. So doing some work to get information can help. But maybe we go one more. I do a quest, and this character says, you know, when you brought me 6 foxtails, it really reminded me of my tragic backstory, which I will tell you gradually over the course of this game. So as we complete quests, they tell me a bit and a bit and a bit more. And then finally, we have the platinum tier, I guess, which is that thing that you did that you thought was unrelated to me, when you brought me those 6 foxtails, it actually had a relationship to this tragic backstory that I have. But I don't want to tell you because it's tragic. And I'm not going to tell you until you invest a bunch of time into doing various things and quests for me and earn it, because this is how people work. And I like to think about this as like an actual human friendship, where it's like if I walk up to a new person who I've never met before and they're like, "Let me tell you everything there is to know about myself." Sometimes that's a little weird and frightening. But, you know, as people, like as we get to know people, we learn more. Gradually, they open up. We earn that information from our friends by knowing them and hanging out with them and doing things. And characters are no different. But we can gamify that in a video game.
So let's talk about a couple different types of NPCs. I've got this little chart here of what we're calling the 4 NPC archetypes. And so going clockwise from the top, we've got obstacles, which these are your standard like run-of-the-mill bad guys that get in your way. We've got helpers, who are like allies and party members, people that help you along your journey. You've got quest givers, who these are people giving you short-term things to do during your story, and they often reward your progress with new stuff, information, things like that. And then finally, we have catalysts, which might be the bad guy. The big bad guy might be someone trapped in a castle you need to save. A catalyst character is someone who's driving the story in a major way. Molly was talking about like plot value before. These are characters with high plot value. And so I'm going to map a couple examples on here. Because first, like, we have really easy ones, like, you know.
And by the way, you know, like, this is our stab. Honestly, everybody interprets characters differently. This is just kind of an example of how to think about these things when you're planning your game.
Yeah. And first we have the really easy ones, like we have a Goomba, who's like clearing an obstacle. You know, and then we have like Navi, who is obviously a helper, always very eager to help you. Pretty much anyone in World of Warcraft or GTA or any open world game with a symbol like this over their head is a quest giver. And then Baby Mario and Yoshi's Island is a catalyst, because the whole game is about, you know, trying to get that baby to where he needs to be. And so, like, simple characters like this are really easy to map, but like the best characters and the ones that end up being really memorable, and they are the ones who tend to be blends of like a bunch of these archetypes. Like you have characters like Deckard Cain, who's like a quest giver and an occasional helper. You got Majima from the Yakuza franchise, who's like, is he a friend? Is he a foe? Like,
I don't think he even knows.
Yeah. And then you have like the King of all Cosmos, who's a catalyst, but he also like gives you little quests.
He tells you what to do.
But also he's frankly, he's also an obstacle, because like he's withholding his love from you. So that's a whole other thing. Eris is somewhere on the helper catalyst spectrum.
That's Handsome Jack. That's not Eris.
There's Eris. The Handsome Jack's a big bad, but also occasional boss fight.
They kind of have similar hair.
Cortana's a quest-giving catalyst helper. She's a little bit of everything.
Anyway, you can go crazy. And the point is that you don't have to have a character just be one thing. And it can be really fun when you're developing a character, like, okay, I know this character needs to be a quest giver, but is there any other work they could do? Like, what else could they be doing to add to my game and my story?
Yeah, and so like GLaDOS, one of my personal favorite characters of all time, like over Portal 1 and 2, she slides all over this.
She's
scale.
Everything, yeah. She does all of it.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. There's another concept that I want to talk about here called turning the character, which is something that the Russell T Davies, the lead writer for the reboot of Doctor Who, talked about, where he described his technique for writing characters over time as turning them around and shining lights on them from new angles as time goes on to let you see the wrinkles and details in new ways from episode to episode and season to season. And I think this is something that's super applicable to games because, like, in a game, like, sometimes you can have, like Molly's mentioned, like, you can have a game that's, like, 60 hours long that you're spending with a character. And like with discovering lore, if you let the player learn things about characters at their own pace, it'll mean more to them. So, like, to talk about a little bit about how this works, so it's perfectly fine to start with tropes and then kind of add layers on. Like, if you introduce someone and they seem like a grizzled badass, like, and then over time you learn more things about them. Like, that feels really cool. And that grizzled badass gives the player a great place to hook in the beginning. Like we were just talking about, you can combine archetypes and mash things together. Like, maybe someone isn't just a dumb, jock, or or another thing, but they're kind of both. Another thing is leaving room for mystery, which we've kind of touched on a little bit, but it's the idea that, like, you don't want to give away your character's whole personality and backstory. Leave some room for speculation, like, especially in this day and age of the internet, when people talk about things a lot and they have a lot of conversations.
Leave people something to imagine, something to think about.
And then finally, like, it's a game, so you want to make the player work for learning all this stuff. Like, you want to hide those bits of personality and backstory, maybe as rewards for side quests, or like they go poke around someone's environment. Like, an example Molly uses a lot is, like, talking about in Deus Ex, you learn that your character loves repairing clocks because you go into his apartment and you find, like, a bunch of books about clock repair, which is a great little example of, like, you only learn that by poking around. And all these things are more interesting ways for an NPC to tell you about themselves than just dumping it on you. So as we're coming towards the end of our talk, I have a little video clip I wanted to show about the importance of making characters unique and kind of fun, the fun, interesting ways that you can do that. It's interesting because it's looking into the way that characters behave, look, and react, and how that can tell you so much about them. And this is stuff that, like, a writer or a narrative designer might not control, but, like, if you create a character that other people start to love, that are on your team, then this is the kind of stuff that maybe they can find inspiration from. So anyway, so this was an exercise done by the animation team for the movie Big Hero 6 at Disney, and they were just given the description: the character walks through the door and sits down to eat. And they then did versions of that for all the characters in the movie to try and show their personalities and things about them. And so, like, Baymax is, like, very well-meaning but clumsy. You have Hero, who's like who's a kid who's kind of always on the go, and he's got a lot more energy to him.
Well, and I think that this is such a great example of appeal when we were talking about appeal earlier. Like, what is the appeal of each of these characters? And you don't need words coming out of somebody's mouth to have amazing appeal in a character. Each one of them have their own unique personalities just by doing the things that they do.
And, like, one of my favorites is this way that Aunt Cass sits down, like that, like that's a moment. And and so, like, I just like so this I just think this is such a great way of sort of saying, like, any moment can be a character moment, and, like, you can use anything to kind of bring a character's personality to the forefront.
In conclusion, I would say, if you take away anything from this talk, my thinking is a good story is not motivated by plot. It is motivated by people. It is motivated by characters.
And so when making characters, like, just remember that, there's a wide spectrum of character types that you can have. Having great characters is the key to fantastic stories because, they begin creating stories just by being there. And finding ways to add great characters to your game will help people fall in love with it.
And when it comes to lore, I just try not to forget, lore, its purpose is to immerse the player in your world. I keep saying it over and over again because that's what it's there to do. Like, it's an easy thing to ask yourself, is this lore helping to immerse the player? The second would be the order in which you deliver it matters. Try not to inundate the player with too much information too quickly. It's great to have a lot of interesting lore in your game, but just think about the cadence of its delivery. And then finally, lore can be easily overwhelming, both for the developer and the player. It's like spice. A little bit just goes a long way.
Yeah. And so, in closing, story is only as good as its characters, so everyone should try and make them great.
Thank you.
That's us.
I think we have a little time for questions if anybody's got one they would like to ask. I promise to do my best. I am a little jet lagged.
Hi. So
That is an amazing shirt. Sorry.
thank you. So a little while ago, I played a game that I fell in love with the lore of the game. I think it was the best lore I've ever experienced in a game, personally. But I was very, very disappointed by the story that actually took place in that world. What would you say has kind of failed when that happens?
That's really hard. You know, and obviously, so I think this is something that happens. The reason we actually wanted to give this talk in the first place is I've worked with different teams, and I find that as game developers, we all, I think we're good at developing lore because developing lore requires the same muscles that developing good gameplay requires. It's like basically it's like building a house, and you're really good at like figuring out what is the structure of that house and how does it work. We're great at creating that kind of experience. But when it comes to, it can be very easy to be overwhelmed by those pieces. And I think that's what happens from time to time. I don't think anybody means for it to happen, but story is more about simplicity and feeling and these characters. And so I honestly think they're like two different muscles, where it's like I can jog every day, but I'm not going to be good at lifting heavy box. They're kind of different things. And so that's kind of why we actually want to talk about characters so much, is I think what makes a story good is about so much more than its lore. It's usually the people that convey it. So my simple answer to you would probably be that the characters just didn't do a great job of telling you why you cared about that lore, giving you that context that you need.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that covers a lot of it. Yeah, I think too. I think it's just the idea of like sometimes like. I've been in the situation you've been in too, where it's like where it's like I get really into like the world and the backstory of stuff. I'm like, this is all super cool, and then like if the story that's actually being told in that world is kind of underwhelming, I think that's a great example of, you know, maybe that like. I wouldn't want to speculate on that on something I don't actually know, but yeah, there's usually some sort of reason that like one got a lot of attention and the other one didn't.
Yeah, I would say that they're like two components, you know, and so one can be really well done, but you know the other is something in and of itself. So yeah, that's kind of what I think anyway.
Thank you.
So I'm an aspiring narrative designer.
Awesome.
And I was wondering if this presentation was made purely based on you guys' experiences, or if you used any references, or at least if you could, if in case you did use references, if you could recommend something or like some kinds of training to get someone started.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because like Molly and I both came from, before we were doing story and games, like we were both working in different, working in different backgrounds. Like I used to write animated movies. Molly used to be a concept artist, and so a lot of our stuff has been either on the job training or stuff that we've kind of learned from other people. Like we've been really lucky to work with like some great veterans of the industry who've kind of passed things along. So
yeah, I'll think about it though, because if I can think of some, I know there are a lot of great books out there and references. If I can think of anything, I'll tweet it, because that's a really great question, and I kind of wish that I didn't go to school for game design, and so I would love to read something too. But no, apart from the things we cited, most of it just comes from experience and playing games, honestly. But I will say the best teacher for me was playing games, and anytime that I found something, or watching films or whatever, anytime I find something that bothers me, I try to look into that feeling, where it's like, well, why does it bother me? Like, it's so easy to just say, I don't know, that's not for me. But if you really try and like take that feeling and see, like pull it out by the root, you can usually figure out some things about yourself and about that piece of content. And try to, I think the best teacher is looking at something. I love playing games that have problems, because it's like those are the best teachers. The good ones, you just kind of let things have a pass because it's like you're having so much fun.
Thank you very much.
Hey, so I got just two things I want to say before my actual question, which is that first, great presentation.
Thank you.
Love to hear you talk.
Second off, really sorry to hear about what happened to Telltale. I hope it didn't affect you too negatively, and I hope you're doing great now.
Thank you.
And my actual question, there's the old saying, nothing is new under the sun. And so my question is, has there ever been a moment where you have written a character and then later you have either been told or realized that, oh, that character already exists in a story, guess I gotta scrap it?
That was literally, I think, my Monday. I had to think.
All the time.
Yeah, no, I think especially like now with just so much of everything coming out, movies, TV, like games, like it's hard to keep track of everything coming out. And so like I wrote this whole storyline into something, and one of the designers on the game was like, "You realize you just ripped off this movie that was in theaters last year, right?" And I was like, "No, I never saw that, but all right, let me go do something different because they got out first." So yeah, no, it is definitely hard, and I think the best you can do is if it's early enough on and you feel like there's something you can fix that won't destroy everything, like definitely try and fix it. But like it's definitely one of those things where you need to have a good long think about it, where you need to sit back and say like, okay, how similar is this? How much would it destroy to change it? And can I think of something better? Because I mean, like, because frankly, there are also times where like, where you'll throw something away because you realize you accidentally ripped something else off, and you come up with something even better. And so that's great. But then there are also definitely times where trying to be original can just end up
Make you mad.
Yeah, can just destroy things.
I will say, yeah, it's funny. If you, I have this happen too, I think that it's not so bad if you're ripping off. If it's really like, I had a person come up to me recently on a thing I was working on, being like, "This was a plot in Dishonored," and I was like, "Damn it!" So if that is the case, then you got to change it. Like, that's unfortunate, and it happens. But I will say, if people come at you and say, well, that's a very common trope, or, that feels cliche, I would be wary about subjective feedback like that, because frankly, anything can be cliche. It's really about how you execute something. It's not necessarily has it been done before. So I think it's okay to take something that's been seen before, as long as you give it a little twist that makes it your own.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
I have a great love of villains, so much that I make them the protagonists in most of my work.
That is rad.
And but you spoke about the importance of character appeal, and I sort of worry that not everyone shares my love of villains. So
well, and so that was part
wait,
of.
did you have a question?
Yeah, sorry.
so I'm basically just wondering if like. Yeah.
How do?
Sort of threw me off. Should I worry about people not liking my villainous protagonist?
It's funny because it's like the thing I love about that Walt Disney quote about appeal is he does talk about how like villains can be appealing too, and it's why it's such a weirdly subjective term, because like appeal just means can you see something of yourself in that character, and like I think some of the best villains are ones that we can see a little bit of ourselves in. So it's like if you have a villain and it's like. It can be even kind of scarier, like if you understand where a villain is coming from, where
It's like, oh, I really relate to this person.
Yeah, where it's like, oh, this person's a villain because they were treated super unfairly at some point, and so it's like, oh, like I know how that feels, and.
Well, I totally agree. I think the best villains teach us something about ourselves, and so my answer to that question would be, well, first of all, if this is something that you're excited about doing, and this is the thing that you wanna make, then you should make that thing. It's important to care what people want to see to a certain point, but if you have a thing that you want to tell, then you should tell that thing. I will say, to the Walt Disney point, though, I think a villain can be extremely appealing and interesting and fun. I really love... God, now I can't. I'm on a stage with lights pointing at me, so I'm blanking. But what was the villain in Snow White, like with the amazing?
Oh, the
Maleficent.
Queen?
I love Maleficent. Like, she's so cool. She's like drama. So my point is, I think that you could totally, that there's no problem there.
It's just a different kind of appeal.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much.
No problem. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you for coming, and I hope you stick around for the next talk. I think it's Ryan, isn't it? Mm-hmm. It's going to be awesome. And thank you again to Konsoll for having us, and have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everybody. everybody.